A lot of times when we think of marketing KPIs, we think of click-through rate, cost per click, cost per conversion, clicks, impressions, you name it. But really what we need to do is tie those KPIs into the main 4 practice KPIs and be able to tie it all together and see how they're related. So that's what we're going to do. So the first KPI is welcome back to episode 77 now of the Dental Practice Launch Podcast. We are on episode 77. We're closing in on that century mark, and that's pretty exciting because I've been doing this for a few years now, off and on, and been consistently doing it now since, for the last year and a half or so, and we're approaching the 100 mark, and we've got some great episodes planned. But before we talk about today's episode, which, by the way, this episode is so important for practice owners of all, experience, seasons, you name it, because ultimately what we're going to talk about, if you saw from the title, if you don't know these 4 KPIs in your practice, you're flying blind, and you don't want to fly blind. Let me tell you, because I've seen it happen a lot, and it also causes a lot of unneeded anxiety. So we're going to dive into that. This will be a short, hopefully impactful episode for all of you listening. For those of you who are listening, before I dive in, I would love it if you haven't already. Please subscribe to the Dental Practice Launch Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcasts, or if you're watching this on YouTube or on our website, if you can give it a thumbs up on the YouTube video there, it helps me out a ton. So really, really appreciate that. And without further ado, let's dive in. So I've been doing this for more than a decade now, and from the marketing side, there's so many things that we can look at as far as KPIs, and a KPI, for those of you listening, just in case you don't know, is a key performance indicator. It's really one of the things you want to measure, in your practice, and every business has them or should have them. And, a lot of times when we think of marketing KPIs, traditionally, we think of click-through rate, cost per click, cost per conversion, clicks, impressions, you name it. And those are certainly serve a purpose and are important from a marketing side of it. But really what we need to do is tie those KPIs into the main 4 practice KPIs and be able to tie it all together and see how they're related. So that's what we're going to do. So the first KPI that every practice should know, so you're not flying blindly, is your new patient number. So we specifically like to talk about new patients scheduled. So not necessarily new patients seen. Okay. There can be a difference there. Cause if you're, at the end of the month and you've scheduled a new patient for October 5th, you're not going to count that as a new patient seen in September, but you would count it as a new patient scheduled for September. So I'm talking about new patients scheduled here. But you got to know how many monthly new patients you're getting, right? It's pretty self-explanatory. I do feel like this is one most practice owners know, but you really want to know it. You don't want to guesstimate, say, I think like 15 or so, and then you look at it, it's actually 18, or maybe it was 11. Like, you need to know this number exactly. And the reason this is so important is because we need to know how many new patients are we scheduling throughout the year. Do we notice trends and dips in certain months of the year? And from our schedule perspective, doctor schedule, hygiene schedule, can we get patients in within, a week period, new patients? Can we fit patients in within a 1-week period, a 2-week period at the very, very latest? But, within a week is kind of practically ideal. So this is where some people get hung up, because if they're saying, why are my new patient numbers not growing? And then we look, and especially this can happen with startups, the first 6 months, you're just trying to get people in. They're all new patients at that point. But at that 6-month mark, recare and, hygiene starts to happen. So that blocks time in the schedule. Then you got more restorative work that happens. Before you know it, those new patient openings start in the schedule to shrink, and you don't have as many options for patients to choose from. And at that point, then you start booking patients out 3 weeks, 4 weeks. I've seen it way further than 4 weeks before too. And then you start to wonder, well, why are my new patient numbers dipping? Well, it's because you may not have room in the schedule. So you want to make sure that those two are kind of correlated together. What's the number of new patients you've seen, last month, the previous month, and how does that correlate to what your actual schedule and openings look like? So that's the first thing that you need to track in order to have a pulse on it, but then also know if you can grow and put more into your advertising, into your marketing, but maybe need to adjust the schedule, go to a block scheduling format, whatever the case may be. So that's the first one. The second one is monthly new patient production. So what was the production that came just from new patients alone from that month? And this is key because, as your practice is growing, especially if it's a newer practice, obviously if you're established, you've got historic data, but you want to be able to kind of get a rough idea of what percentage of your practice's revenue or production comes specifically from new patients. So again, this is an indicator of, do we need to make more room in the schedule for more new patients so we can get more new patient production in? Then obviously get total, recare and restorative treatment and all of that down in the future to compound and add up too. So you got to know what your new patient production is per month. One of the areas though that I see some people get hung up on this is, especially around their marketing at the very beginning, they try to directly correlate their monthly ROI to just the new patient production. And this is a mistake because your new patients, that's just for their first appointment, right? That production number for the new patient production is just coming from that first appointment. But, your marketing should be bringing in patients who majority of the time are then going to come back, at least 6 months later, right? For hygiene and continue to come back. And they're going to need a crown done at some point, or maybe an extraction or filling or whatever the case is. So you need to be able to track that long-term with your marketing. So not just be able to say, hey, I spent $3,000 this month and I only got $5,000 in new patient production. Well, that $5,000 in new patient production, what's that going to look like over a 6-month, 12-month period? Historically speaking, from the data that we look at, that's going to be, at least double, and oftentimes more than that. So don't be too short-sighted with your marketing. And we've talked about that in previous episodes. But second KPI was new patient production per month. Your third KPI, which flows perfectly into this, is your total production, right? So what is the total production in the practice, including your existing patients who come back, including the patient who's been there for 3 years and came back this past month and decided to do, Invisalign treatment or an implant, whatever the case is. You need to be able to measure that total production. And this is important because, again, if you're measuring this correctly and you have this data on hand, you should be able to start to see, okay, here's how much we know our new patients spend on average their first appointment, but then here's how much that new patient we can pretty much expect over a 12-month period will spend in total at the practice, right? And that's really kind of something that you pull from your total production, so you can kind of find the average revenue that you're getting per patient. So again, okay, if it costs me $100 to get a new patient in the door, maybe their new patient appointment, they only spend $200 in the practice. Maybe it's just $200 in production. But over a year, if that patient spends $1,200, well, before you know it, that $100 you spent to get that patient in the door resulted in $1,100 in profit for the practice, not just $100 profit like it may look like in the short term. So you got to track the total production as well and really look at those numbers so how much patients spend on average in the practice. That's key. You have to know that. And then the last part is something we touched on a little bit there, which is the KPI number 4. What is your cost to acquire a new patient? Not necessarily a cost per conversion. Again, it's important to know that and track that, because a conversion in the marketing world could be a phone call, a new patient opportunity, as we like to call it. But how much does it actually cost to actually get that patient in the door? They scheduled, they booked, they were seen. And you need to know this as well as your cost per conversion, but you need to know what your cost per new patient is, because again, this will then help you reverse engineer your future growth. And when you can reverse engineer future growth, it makes marketing and business ownership so much less stressful if you think about it. Because let's use just the last example that I used in KPI number 3, but let's say after we have some data and we say, okay, we know after, running these, doing marketing or being open for 6 months, 12 months, let's just say it's 12 months, for every $100 that we spent, we would get a new patient in the door. And again, if you knew, okay, and then we saw that those patients on average spent $1,200 in the practice. That's a great ROI, right? And you're looking at the long-term ROI, which is even better. So you have real data there. So then you can kind of reverse engineer to say, well, this year we really want to add 10 more new patients per month, and we're going to open up times in the schedule, or maybe we're hiring additional teams that we can fit them in. So knowing that and knowing what data you have, essentially what you should be able to do is say, okay, well, if it costs us $100 to get a new patient in the door, and that's data, over, at least a 12-month period, then we should be able to spend roughly, $100 times 10 more new patients a month, be $1,000. If we spend about $1,000 more per month, we should be able to, get close to that number fairly consistently. So it helps you reverse engineer that process. Now, one of the things you may be saying is, well, Shane, what if, from the new patients that we're getting, how do we know which of those actually came from the marketing dollars we spent? How many of those are actually, people who heard about us through a referral, or how many of those, drove by the office? The way that the most successful practice owners we've worked with look at marketing, and the ones that are absolutely crushing it, is everything is marketing, right? Everything is marketing. Your internal referrals, those are marketing, like absolutely, because the patient experience, one, has to be good. So that's marketing in and of itself. But your omnipresence in the community makes those internal referrals much more possible. So think about this, for example. If a patient is, considering a dentist, maybe they've been seeing a bunch of things about your practice on Facebook, Instagram, you've been running ads showing patient testimonials, highlights of, what makes the practice unique. They go to Google, they see your practice, they see the, 5-star reviews, like all of those pieces there. But then they go to their friend and it's like, hey, I need to find a dentist. Who do you recommend? And they say, oh, we recommend, Dr. Shane and his practice. And then they make the connection of, oh, I've been seeing like a bunch of stuff about Dr. Shane. I know Dr. Shane, or I've heard of that office. Don't you think that's going to be a much more likely scenario that they're going to then really take that advice and move forward with it and become a patient, and not just a patient, but a patient who potentially become a long-term patient and is going to know, like, and trust you like right out the gates? Absolutely. Versus if somebody just told them, I recommend so-and-so, but they hadn't seen anything else, heard anything else about you, had no idea, about your practice. So that's the way that we really want to look at marketing, because everything is marketing at the end of the day. So if you spend, in total in your marketing budget, $3,000 a month, right? And you get, 30 new patients from, that month, that's $100 per new patient, right? So it's $100 per new patient. And that, again, everything should compound with the marketing campaigns, the internal marketing. And so that's what you can look at as your cost per new patient. Now, you could get granular and you could say, okay, of that $3,000 we spent, we got 10 new patients from maybe this one campaign, right? So that'd be $300 to acquire that one new patient from that specific campaign. And certainly, like, those are things we look at. We want to measure if a campaign is just absolutely not doing its job, especially if it's like a Google ad campaign over a period of time, then yeah, adjustments need to be made. But all in all, really trying to look at this holistically for the practice and include all of your marketing from internal, external, ground marketing, you name it, and really gives you a good answer of what your cost to acquire a new patient is. And again, the most successful practices we work with, they know these numbers. And this is, kind of the thought process that goes into that. So just to kind of summarize, KPI number 1, you've got to know your new patient scheduled each and every month. Number 2, your new patient production each month, so production that came specifically from new patients. Number 3, your total production that came from your existing patients and basically all production outside of just new patient production. And then number 4, what is the cost to acquire a new patient? Actually get a new patient in the door. If you know these 4 metrics and KPIs, it makes growing your practice much easier, much less stressful, gives you some actual hard data to go off of, and then it allows you to reverse engineer the process of whatever your future growth goals are. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Dental Practice Launch podcast. Once again, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe, like, anything we can get some love on these. We love seeing the engagement there. And of course, if you're looking for a trusted marketing partner, go over to our website, crimsonmediagroup.com, where we help dentists build freedom in their practice through proven online marketing. See you on the next one.